China confirmed today it's holding 2 Canadians for allegedly compromising Chinese national security. The arrests are part of an escalating dispute between Ottawa and Beijing, triggered when Canada arrested a highly respected telecom executive from China. Meng Wanzhou is Huawei's CFO. She now faces extradition to the U.S. President Donald Trump has said, though, he could intervene in her case if it were to benefit a trade deal. How did Canada wind up in this position, caught in between the crossfire between 2 angry economic giants? Michael HIRSON served for 3 years as the U.S. Treasury's chief representative in Beijing. He now leads Eurasia Group's coverage of China. Mr. HIRSON joins me via Skype from New York City. Hi there. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Canada, I'm sure you're aware, is firmly, or appears to be firmly, stuck between 2 giants here, the U.S. on one side and China on the other. Now, of course, China has detained 2 Canadian citizens. You know how the country works inside and out. Is there any way for Canada out of this?
I think there is a way to climb down, and I think what we have to watch here is the fact that for Beijing, they're wrestling with a very difficult political situation. The arrest of this Huawei executive, Ms. Meng, has really aroused nationalist sentiment in China. But at the same time, Beijing is very reluctant to retaliate against the U.S. because of the fragility of the ceasefire on trade between President Trump and President Xi. So unfortunately, Canada is caught in the middle, as you said. And I think there is going to be some reaction in Beijing within the leadership where they realize that there are real political risks to overstepping and being too aggressive against Canada here. So I think there is some potential for cooler heads to prevail and for there to be a face-saving way to climb down.
So what might, from your perspective, be the way in which they come to that realization, that they start to absorb that political risk? Is it through messaging from Canada, or does it have to come from elsewhere?
I think it's going to be probably just a pragmatic recognition that being this aggressive against Canada has a degree of diminishing returns. I think this is a problem that China is realizing that it faces now across a number of different U.S. allies, where Beijing was a little bit too confident about its ability to really assert itself and to have U.S. allies side with China on issues like Huawei. Not just this arrest, but really what's been a global pushback against Huawei. And so I think the bottom line is for China, there's an emotional response here, but I think they will recognize eventually that this is not helping, and in many ways it's driving more of a wedge between China and Canada at a time really when Beijing does not want to lose international support when it's already dealing with a very difficult challenge from the Trump administration.
Do you think they're going to come to that realization, though, before further escalating things? I mean, we've seen reports through state-related media, I guess you could safely call it, where they're threatening escalation, saying to prepare for more. Do you think that they will further escalate it before, if in fact they do come to that sort of more pragmatic realization eventually?
I think it's difficult. Look, I mean, Beijing's system, as you said, is very much a black box. Nationalist sentiment is pretty strong here, so I don't want to be overconfident in terms of what's coming. I will say that China's state media can be an imperfect guide in terms of where policymakers are going, especially at a time like now where there's a lot of nationalist sentiment and state media tends to play that up. So I don't necessarily regard warnings from the state media as a sign of where Beijing is going, because these have been misleading in the past.
What about U.S. involvement? Do you think there's any way? I mean, we've had discussions over the week here about this being sort of a different world where the U.S. maybe doesn't have Canada's back in the same capacity as it would have in the past, though that's nothing that's for certain by any means. Do you think there's any chance? I mean, we've heard rumors of President Trump, or we didn't hear rumors. He said he would intervene in the criminal case against the CFO of Huawei. Now we're hearing from the Wall Street Journal that his aides are telling him to calm down on that rhetoric. What do you think?
I don't know the extent to which the U.S. is going to which President Trump is going to insert himself personally into this issue. I think, as you said, there are real political risks for President Trump and policy risks, too. I mean, he really runs the risk, if he intervenes, of sending a message that trade issues are more important than law enforcement and national security issues. But I think that the U.S. certainly will have a lot of sympathy for what Canada is going through here. And this strengthens the voice of hawks in the U.S. system who point to episodes like this as exactly the danger that countries face with an over-reliance on China as economic partner. So this is strengthening hawkish voices in the United States, and I think that they will be inclined to support Canada over this issue.
And just before I let you go, you talked about the nationalist sentiment in China, and then you also sort of speculated that perhaps pragmatism could win the day, although, you know, we don't know what level of optimism we can have for that. How do the two jive together? Like, how do you square the circle, and how much pressure is there on the government in China because of that kind of sentiment?
Well, the regime in Beijing does have an ability to control the narrative through the state media, through censorship, and so they are to some extent riding a tiger, where you do have, you know, a lot of domestic sentiment in Chinese households that are reacting to this angrily. But I don't think that Beijing is boxed into a corner. In other words, I think that there is room to climb down. And, you know, these kinds of episodes are not, of course, limited to Canada. We've seen foreign policy disputes erupt in China with Japan over historical issues, with South Korea over similar issues. And Beijing has found a way to tamp down those tensions eventually when it realizes that it's not suiting the government and its foreign policy instruments. So I don't see China's leadership as boxed in here. I do think that there's a face-saving way of climbing down. How long it's going to take to get there, I don't want to be overconfident, but I do think that they have a degree of freedom here in terms of how they play this.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. HIRSON.
Thank you.